Hey, don't forget to hit that like button, drop your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe so you never miss out on our latest stories. Trust me, you'll want to stick around for this one. I never could have imagined a night like this, especially not at 48. By that age, you think you've got life figured out, especially when it comes to marriage. You think you know the rhythm, the familiar patterns that have defined your relationship for years. But life has a funny way of throwing curveballs, pulling you into situations you never saw coming. Before you know it, you're in the middle of something entirely new, looking around, wondering how you got there and if you even belong. It all started like any other evening. Just a casual dinner party at our place. My husband, Ethan, had invited a few of his coworkers over to celebrate wrapping up a big project at work. Nothing fancy, no special occasion, just good food, wine, and easy conversation. But looking back, there was this weird undercurrent, like the night had something unexpected in store. Not in a bad way, just different. Like the universe was nudging me towards something I couldn't quite see yet. The evening began like so many others. Ethan, as usual, was in his element, laughing and telling stories, completely at ease with his work crowd. Me? I did what I always did, played the role of the dutiful hostess. You'd think after all these years of being married to a man who thrived in the spotlight, I'd be used to these gatherings. But honestly, I never really was. There was always this distance, like I was on the outside looking in, watching a world I didn't fully belong to. Don't get me wrong, I loved Ethan. I supported him in everything he did. But his colleagues spoke a language I didn't understand. Corporate jargon, inside jokes, discussions about market trends and office politics. It was like they were in a club I wasn't invited to. I didn't mind being the quiet observer, but it was hard not to feel like I was on the sidelines of the world that mattered most to him. That night, though, was different. For one thing, Ryan, one of Ethan's coworkers, showed up a little late. I'd met Ryan a few times at work events, but we'd never really talked beyond the usual small talk. He was in his early 50s, always impeccably dressed, with this quiet confidence that made him stand out without even trying. When he walked into our living room, I felt this shift. Nothing obvious, just a subtle change in the air. The way he looked at me, his gaze lingered a little too long. His smile was a little too warm, a little too personal. It was subtle, but I noticed. Still, I brushed it off. He was just being friendly, right? What harm could there be in that? We sat down to dinner, and at first, everything seemed normal. The conversation flowed like it always did. But as the night went on, I couldn't help but notice how Ryan's attention kept drifting back to me. It wasn't overt, but it was there, like he was really seeing me in a way that made my heart skip a beat. I'm not usually one to get flustered, but there was something about the way Ryan looked at me, the way he listened like every word I said mattered. It was more than polite interest, it felt personal, like he genuinely cared about what I had to say. And honestly, it had been a long time since I'd felt that kind of attention. Ethan, meanwhile, was deep in conversation with the others, talking shop like always. I didn't mind. It had been years since I'd felt seen the way Ryan was seeing me. At my age, you don't exactly expect to feel noticed anymore. Years of raising kids, managing the house, and supporting Ethan's career had kind of faded me into the background. But that night, Ryan made me feel alive again. Like I was more than just a wife, a mom, a hostess. Just before dessert, Ryan leaned in, his voice low. You know, you have this calming presence. I always enjoy talking to you, even about the little things. His words weren't exactly flirty, but they hit me in a way I wasn't prepared for. It was like he'd tapped into something I didn't even realize I was missing. The moment passed quickly. Dessert was served, Ethan cracked a joke, and the conversation moved on. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted. There was this tension in the air, this unspoken connection between Ryan and me. As the night wound down, Ryan was the last to leave. Ethan was in the kitchen cleaning up, like he always did, and I stood by the door, saying goodbye. Ryan hesitated, his expression serious. I really enjoyed tonight, he said softly. You're a rare person, you know that? Before I could respond, He gave me this look, like he was acknowledging something between us that neither of us had said out loud. I smiled politely, feeling my cheeks flush, and closed the door behind him. But as I stood there, staring at the empty hallway, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed. That night, something clicked in me. What started as just another ordinary evening left me with this weird, lingering feeling I couldn't shake. Was it the wine? The tension in the air? Or had something deeper shifted, something that was about to turn my life upside down in ways I couldn't even imagine yet? I didn't have the answers, but I had this gut feeling I was about to find out. The next few days passed in a blur. I went through the motions, work, errands, keeping the house in order, and, of course, supporting Ethan as he threw himself back into his job. He didn't seem to notice anything was off. To him, everything was the same. But for me? There was this quiet storm brewing inside, something I couldn't put into words but couldn't ignore either. Ryan's words from that night kept replaying in my head. You're a rare person, you know that? What did he mean by that? Was it just a polite compliment, or was there something more behind it? The way he'd looked at me, like he knew something I didn't, left me unsettled. I'd never thought of myself as rare. I was just me. But in his eyes, it felt like there was something more, something I hadn't even realized I was missing. I couldn't shake the tension whenever I thought about him. It's not like I was looking for anything. I loved Ethan, and I was happy with the life we'd built. But Ryan had stirred something in me, something I hadn't felt in years. It started as curiosity, then grew into this need for validation, this hunger for something beyond the predictable routine of my days. Ethan didn't seem to notice my distraction, and I was glad. I didn't want him to think I was unhappy or unsatisfied. But how could I explain what I was feeling? How could I explain this pull toward Ryan, a man who, in some ways, felt like a stranger, yet in others, seemed to understand me better than anyone else? It was late one afternoon, just as I was about to start dinner, when the phone rang. It was Ethan's office. For a second, I thought it might be him calling to check in. But no, it was Ryan. I froze. Hello? I answered, trying to keep my voice steady. Hi, it's Ryan, he said, his tone calm but with this underlying warmth I couldn't quite place. I hope I'm not disturbing you. No, not at all, I replied quickly. What's up? Well, I just wanted to thank you for such a lovely evening last week. It was a real pleasure to get to know you better, he said, and I could hear the sincerity in his voice. I've been thinking about it, and I'd like to take you up on that offer we talked about, for a coffee sometime, if you're free. I didn't know what to say. My heart skipped a beat, and I felt this unexpected flutter of nerves. Why was he asking me out for coffee? Sure, it wasn't a date, not in the traditional sense, but it felt significant. Like he was crossing a line, however subtle. Coffee? I managed to say, trying to sound casual, like this was no big deal. Sure, I guess that sounds nice. Ryan chuckled softly on the other end, and I could almost hear the smile in his voice. Great. How about tomorrow afternoon, after work? We could meet at that little cafe you like, the one near the park. I hesitated. Something inside me was screaming to be cautious, to decline and keep things simple. But there was another part of me, something raw and unspoken, that wanted to see where this could go. I had no idea what I was hoping for, but I couldn't shake the feeling that this moment, this conversation, was somehow pivotal. All right, I finally said, my voice barely above a whisper. I'll see you tomorrow. There was a pause, and then, I'm looking forward to it. His voice lingered, and I could sense something unspoken hanging in the air between us. After we hung up, I stood there for a moment, the phone still pressed to my ear. I couldn't quite wrap my head around what had just happened. Why had he called me? Why had he suggested meeting for coffee, just the two of us? I felt this rush of excitement mixed with guilt. What was I doing? Why did I feel this pull toward him, this magnetic attraction I couldn't explain? I pushed the thoughts aside. Tomorrow would come soon enough, and I'd deal with it then. For now, I had to focus on dinner, on my life with Ethan, and on keeping up the appearance of normalcy. But deep down, I knew this was the beginning of something I couldn't yet comprehend. The next day, I found myself getting ready for the coffee date with Ryan in a way I hadn't expected. I was careful with my outfit, nothing too flashy, but something that made me feel good. I wanted to look nice for this meeting, not for Ryan, but for myself. I hadn't taken much time for myself lately, and there was something about this coffee date that made me realize how little I'd done that. When I arrived at the cafe, I could feel the familiar butterflies in my stomach, like I was going on a date after years of being out of practice. I tried to calm myself, telling myself it wasn't a date, just coffee, just a conversation. But as I saw Ryan standing by the window, his warm smile and easy demeanor made it hard to deny the electricity crackling in the air between us. "Hi," I said, my voice a little shakier than I intended. "Hey," he replied, his eyes lighting up when he saw me. "You look great." I smiled, though I felt a blush rise to my cheeks. The compliment was simple, but the way he said it made me feel special, not in a grand, exaggerated way, but in a way that made me feel seen, understood. We sat down, and as the conversation started, I noticed how natural it felt to talk to him. There was no awkwardness, no pretense. It was just two people sharing a moment. And yet, there was this undeniable undercurrent of something more. Something was shifting between us, and I wasn't sure whether I was ready for it. But I couldn't deny the pull. I was intrigued, uncertain, and yet more alive than I'd been in a long time. As I sat across from Ryan, the conversation flowed effortlessly, like we'd known each other for years instead of just a few fleeting moments. The initial awkwardness from our first meeting had long since faded, replaced by this undeniable ease. His eyes were warm, his smile infectious, and there was this quiet confidence in the way he spoke that made everything feel intimate, even in the middle of a bustling cafe. It felt strange to be in this space with him. I hadn't realized how much I'd been craving someone who truly listened, someone who made me feel like I mattered outside of my role as a wife, a mother, and a caretaker. With Ethan, the conversation often revolved around logistics: what to buy, what to fix, what needed attention. We were partners in the everyday, but somewhere along the way, the spark we once had dimmed. The moments where we truly saw each other, where we shared more than just mundane details, had become fewer and farther between. But with Ryan, it was different. There was this energy that pulsed between us, this undercurrent that hummed with unspoken understanding and possibility. It made me feel seen in a way I hadn't felt in years. "So," Ryan said, leaning in slightly, his gaze never leaving mine, "tell me more about what you do outside of work. What do you enjoy? I'm sure there's more to you than just being Ethan's wife." The question caught me off guard, but I appreciated how he was trying to learn more about me, not just as a reflection of someone else, but as a person in my own right. "Well," I started, my voice soft as I looked down at my coffee cup, taking a moment to collect my thoughts. "I've always loved reading," I said, my voice softening as I thought about it. "I'm a bit of a bookworm, honestly. And I used to paint, too, though I haven't picked up a brush in years. Life just gets busy, you know." Ryan nodded thoughtfully, his eyes never leaving mine. "It's easy to lose sight of those things when you're caught up in everything else, isn't it?" "Yeah," I replied, looking up at him with a faint smile. "You could say that. But I've been trying to find time for myself again, to reconnect with the parts of me I lost somewhere along the way." There it was, the truth spilling out before I could stop it. It felt both terrifying and liberating to admit it out loud. I hadn't realized how much I missed myself until just now. How much I missed the woman I used to be before life became about taking care of everyone else. "I think that's really important," Ryan said, his voice soft but full of sincerity. "You deserve to feel like you're not just a supporting character in someone else's story. You're the lead in your own." I felt a flush creep up my neck at his words. There was something so simple yet profound about what he said. It felt like permission, like I was allowed to take up space in my own life, to be more than just what others needed me to be. The tension between us shifted, growing heavier and more tangible. It was as if the air around us had thickened, charged with a current neither of us could deny. Ryan's eyes lingered on mine, his gaze steady and unwavering. He didn't look at me as just a colleague's wife. He looked at me as a woman, as a person. And in that moment, it felt like he saw me in a way no one had in a long time. I cleared my throat, trying to shake the feelings that were starting to bubble to the surface. I guess we all need to remember who we are sometimes, I said, trying to sound casual, as if the fluttering in my chest didn't exist. Ryan smiled, his lips curving into a knowing expression. Exactly. And it's never too late to start again. The words felt like an invitation, one I wasn't sure I was ready to accept just yet. The waitress arrived with a refill for my coffee, breaking the tension for a brief moment. As she poured, I took a deep breath, trying to steady my racing heart. I didn't know what was happening, but I could feel the pull growing stronger. It was as if we were standing on the edge of something neither of us had named yet, but something that was impossible to ignore. We talked for a while longer, the conversation drifting between light-hearted banter and deeper, more personal revelations. But as the minutes passed, I couldn't help but feel the magnetic charge between us intensifying. It wasn't overt, it wasn't physical, not yet at least, but there was a palpable energy that hummed beneath every word, every glance. At one point, Ryan reached across the table to grab his napkin, brushing his fingers against mine. It was brief, just a fleeting touch, but it sent a jolt through me. My pulse quickened, my breath shallow, as if my body was aware of something my mind was still trying to process. We locked eyes for a split second, and in that moment, everything shifted. It felt like we were both on the brink of something that could change everything. The waitress returned with the check, and Ryan quickly grabbed it, paying before I could protest. "It's on me," he said with a smile that made my heart race. "Consider it a small thank you for a great conversation." I wanted to argue, but there was something about his gesture that felt right, like this was the way things were supposed to unfold, and I was too afraid to stop it. We stood up, and as we walked toward the door, I felt a sense of loss already settling in. I didn't want this moment to end. I didn't want the connection between us to fade. But I knew that whatever was happening between us, whatever was simmering beneath the surface, couldn't be ignored much longer. "Take care," Ryan said, his voice low and sincere as we stepped out into the crisp afternoon air. "I'll see you soon." I nodded, my heart in my throat. "Yeah. I'll see you soon." As I walked back to my car, I felt a mixture of emotions swirling inside me. Part of me was excited, eager for whatever came next. But another part of me felt guilty, conflicted about the path I was starting to walk. There was no denying it, something had shifted, and I couldn't turn back now. The days that followed were a blur of uncertainty and anticipation. I couldn't stop thinking about Ryan, the lingering feeling of his touch, the warmth of his gaze, the way he made me feel alive in a way I hadn't experienced in years. It all consumed me. I tried to push it aside, telling myself it was just a fleeting connection, something that would fade once the initial excitement wore off. But deep down, I knew that wasn't the truth. Something had shifted in me, and I couldn't pretend it didn't matter. I had never been the kind of person to indulge in fantasy or allow myself to entertain feelings that could complicate my life. My marriage to Ethan had always been built on trust, partnership, and shared history. But somewhere along the way, the spark had faded. We were more like roommates than lovers, more like business partners than soulmates. The distance between us had been growing for years, and now, with Ryan, I could see what I had been missing. But guilt nagged at me. I loved Ethan. He was my husband, the father of our children, the person I had chosen to spend my life with. Yet the longing I felt when I thought of Ryan was undeniable. It wasn't just physical, it was emotional. Ryan had made me feel seen, valued, and, most importantly, alive. The connection we shared was real, and the pull between us was something I couldn't ignore. That evening, I sat in our living room, staring out the window as the sun dipped below the horizon. Ethan was in the kitchen, preparing dinner. The sound of his movements was familiar, comforting even, but there was something about it now that felt distant. He didn't notice me sitting there, lost in my thoughts, consumed by the internal battle I was facing. As I listened to him hum to himself, I wondered if he had any idea of the turmoil inside me. Did he feel the distance, too? Or had we both been so consumed by the routine of life that we'd forgotten how to truly connect with each other? A soft knock on the door jolted me from my thoughts, and I turned to find Ethan standing in the doorway, holding 2 glasses of wine. "Dinner's ready," he said with a warm smile. His eyes, however, seemed distant, and I wondered if he had sensed the change in me. "Thanks," I replied, forcing a smile as I stood to join him at the table. As I sat down, the weight of the situation pressed heavily on my chest. I wanted to talk, to tell him how I was feeling, but the words seemed to escape me. How could I explain to Ethan that a part of me had started to awaken? That I had started to question everything I thought I knew about love, about connection? The meal passed in comfortable silence, and yet, beneath the surface, there was an undercurrent of tension. I knew that things between us couldn't stay the way they were forever. I wasn't the same person I had been just a few days ago. Ryan had made sure of that. He had opened my eyes to what I had been missing, the parts of myself. I had buried so much of myself in an attempt to be everything for everyone else. After dinner, I retreated to the living room, needing space to think. As I sat on the couch, I found myself replaying the moments with Ryan, the conversation, the laughter, the way my heart had raced when he looked at me. It was as if I'd been given a glimpse of something more, something deeper, and I didn't know if I was ready to let go of that feeling. My phone buzzed on the coffee table, pulling me out of my reverie. I glanced at the screen and saw Ryan's name. My heart skipped a beat as I hesitated for a moment before picking up. "Hey," I answered, my voice slightly shaky. "Hey," Ryan replied, his voice smooth and calm. "I've been thinking about you." I closed my eyes slowly, allowing the words to wash over me. Their weight settled deep into my chest, like a tide rolling in, both soothing and overwhelming at once. "I've been thinking about you too," I whispered, my voice barely a breath, as if saying it aloud might make it too real. The silence that followed on the other end of the line stretched long, thick with the unspoken. I could almost feel his smile through the phone, warm and knowing, as though he'd been waiting for me to say those very words. There was a quiet pause before he spoke again, his voice laced with a mixture of hope and hesitation. "I was wondering if you wanted to meet again sometime soon." The simple question hung in the air like a delicate thread suspended between us, but it felt so much heavier than its words. I knew what he was really asking. The implication was clear. And for a moment, I let the weight of that question settle in my mind. What would it mean if I saw him again? What would happen to everything I'd built if I crossed that line? Could I still push away the feelings that had unexpectedly surfaced, or would this be the beginning of something I couldn't easily walk away from? Something that would change everything? I don't know, I responded quietly, the words slipping out with an honesty I hadn't intended. My voice was soft, barely above a whisper, betraying the storm of emotions raging inside me. "I don't want to hurt anyone. I don't want to hurt Ethan." The name hung in the air, a silent reminder of the life I'd built, the promises I'd made. But even as I said it, I could feel the heaviness in my words, the realization that no matter how much I tried to protect him, I couldn't ignore what was bubbling to the surface inside me. Ryan's voice came through with a tenderness that made the ache inside me grow. "I understand," he said gently, his tone full of compassion. "But you can't keep denying what's inside you. You deserve to feel like you're more than just a wife. You deserve to be happy." His words resonated deep within me, echoing in the hollow spaces I'd been trying to ignore for so long. I hadn't realized until that moment how much I'd been denying myself in the pursuit of being everything to everyone else. I'd lost sight of who I was, of what I needed. And the most painful realization was that in trying to give so much of myself, I'd neglected the one person who truly mattered, myself. A knot tightened in my chest as I absorbed the truth of his words, the quiet acknowledgement that I'd been holding my breath for far too long. "I need time to think," I said finally, my voice steady despite the heaviness that pressed on my shoulders. The decision weighed on me like 1,000 pounds, but I knew I couldn't rush it. "But I promise I'll figure this out." The promise was as much to myself as it was to him, a commitment to find clarity in the midst of this overwhelming uncertainty. There was a soft, almost resigned sigh on the other end of the line, and for a fleeting moment, I could sense the weight of his own longing mixed with understanding. "Take your time," he said quietly. "Just know that I'm here whenever you're ready." His words were a balm, soothing yet filled with an undercurrent of something deeper. Hope, perhaps. Or the quiet belief that I would eventually find my way. As I hung up the phone, a wave of calm settled over me, unfamiliar yet comforting. For the first time in what felt like forever, I didn't feel like I was being swept along by the currents of life. I felt like I was stepping into the driver's seat of my own journey. The road ahead was uncertain, yes, but it was mine to navigate. There were still so many unanswered questions, so much uncertainty about what the future would hold. But one thing was clear: whatever choice I made, it would be for me, for the woman I was becoming. The path might not be easy, but it was mine to walk. And I knew that I couldn't continue denying the person I was, the person I wanted to become. I walked back into the kitchen, the soft hum of the refrigerator filling the otherwise silent room. Ethan was there, standing at the counter, wiping down the countertops with a dish towel in his hand. His movements were methodical, almost as if he were trying to focus on something that didn't require his full attention. As I stepped into the doorway, he glanced up, his gaze meeting mine. The moment his eyes found mine, his expression shifted, becoming softer, more attuned to the subtle shift in the air. He must have sensed the quiet weight I was carrying because concern flickered across his features. "Are you okay?" he asked gently, his voice warm with a tenderness that seemed to reach out to me, trying to bridge the distance I felt inside. His question, simple as it was, held a quiet sincerity. It was as if he could already tell something was on my mind, something deeper than what I was letting on. I gave a small nod, offering him a faint smile, though it didn't quite reach my eyes. "Yeah, I'm okay." "I'm okay," I replied, my voice steady but laced with a hint of uncertainty. "Just thinking about things." I paused, unsure whether I should say more. But the truth seemed to rise within me, urging me to open up in a way that felt both terrifying and freeing at the same time. Ethan's voice softened even further, the curiosity in it unmistakable, as though he was hoping for more, waiting for me to reveal what was going on beneath the surface. I hesitated for a moment longer, feeling the weight of his unspoken questions in the air between us. But then something shifted within me. I decided to be honest, not just with him, but with myself. About who I was. About the woman I had become outside of everything else, beyond the roles I had played for so long. His eyes softened as he watched me, and in that brief moment, I saw glimpses of the man I had married, the man who had always been there, always supportive, always by my side, even when I didn't fully feel seen. The man who had stood beside me, though we had both changed in ways we hadn't fully acknowledged. "I'm glad to hear that," Ethan said, his voice a little quieter now, as if the weight of my words had settled between us in a way that was both comforting and unsettling. "I think we all need to remember who we are sometimes." His words lingered in the air, hanging there like a quiet affirmation of what I had just begun to realize myself. I smiled softly, genuinely touched by his words. But deep inside, I knew that my journey was far from finished. It wasn't just about rediscovering the woman I used to be, it was about honoring the woman I had become in the process. The woman who had lived through the struggles, the quiet sacrifices, the moments of growth that had shaped me into something new. The path ahead wasn't going to be easy. There were choices I still had to make, choices that would require me to confront fears, doubts, and uncertainties. But I knew, as I stood there in the stillness of our home, that I was ready to take the first step. I was ready to move forward, even if it meant stepping into the unknown. And though I could still feel the tug of fear and guilt in the back of my mind, I made a silent promise to myself: I would not let those feelings control my decisions. This was my time to choose the path that was right for me, no matter how difficult or uncertain it might be. Because for the first time in a long while, I felt a stirring within me, a quiet confidence, a resolve to embrace the future on my own terms. Wherever this journey led, I was finally ready to walk it, no longer weighed down by the past, but guided by the woman I had become.